Hello, my name is Hope from the platform of eSeniors.org. eSeniors is a not-for-profit organization that provides virtual companion for seniors from age 60 and above. Virtual companion is basically designed to provide emotional support for seniors who feel lonely and isolated from their communities. And this is done remotely through the usage of video chat technology. So today, I want to especially welcome you all to today's book reading section. We have been reading a book from Buchi Emecheta titled The Second Class Citizen. We've done several chapters. Today we're going to start off from chapter 4 titled The Daily Minders. The Daily Minders. Listen as I read. Ada started work on the 1st of June. It was almost 3 months since she arrived in the United Kingdom. She was so proud of her job and so happy on this particular June morning that she found beauty in everything. She saw beauty on the faces of her fellow passengers and heard beautiful sounds from the church's guns of the speeding underground train. Spring had come very late that year because it had been a long and bitter winter, and although it was June, the freshness in the air was like that of the first day of April. At Finchel Central, the train emerged from its underground funnel into the open air like a snake from its hole. Ada let down the window and breathed in the cool, pure, watery air. It had rained the night before, and there was wetness everywhere. She saw the back garden of many houses, gardens with flowers of many varieties growing in profusion, lupins and phoenix, delphiniums, sweet pears, and columbines. The wonderful glow of ashram on the edges of many garden paths gave a tiny edge to the carpet of green grass which seemed to cover the ground. The trees had burst into green, ceasing to look like those naked, dried-up, useless old women they had reminded Ada of when she first landed in England. Now everything was young, clean, mouse, and full of juice. At the library, she was quickly taken under the wing of the chief librarian. She was assiduous, explosive in her welcome, and very, very friendly. Miss Cornell was a white lady with wide hips, a wide waist, and a face like a flattened O. She had fine lines around her eyes, and these lines deepened when she smiled, which was most of the time. Even her smiles were wide, displaying her creamy, even teeth. She seemed to have little time for makeup. Her brown hair was cropped just like a man's used to be before the arrival of Jesus' fashion. She left a handful of bulbous curls at the back of her head and another at the front. The latter had a funny way of collapsing on the forehead, and she was forever pushing them back into their rightful place. The coils at the back stayed there under puppet, even when Miss Cornell shocked with laughter. Her skirt was always gathered and homemade. She wore wooden gathered ones in winter and cotton gathered ones in summer. She was untouched by any passing fashion. Come tight skirt, white skirt, come minis, Massey. Miss Cornell had always wore her gathered skirt. This together with unusual tight blouses, gave her the look of an overblown ballet dancer. The other girls were assistants, very young with long, skinny legs. Most of them seemed to be all legs to Ada. Unlike their superior, they were all fashion conscious. They made Ada feel out of place, so she never really became too familiar with them. They made her feel inferior somehow, always talking to boyfriends and clothes. Ada would have liked to join in for some, for she was the same age, but she knew that if she opened her mouth, she would sound bitter. She would have told them that marriage was not a bed of roses, but a tunnel of thorns, fire, and hot nails. Oh, yes, she would have told them all sorts of things, but why, she asked herself, must she spoil other people's dream? So she preferred to listen and smile non-committedly. Soon she settled down to work. She hardly ever sat down, and this was purgatorial to her feet. Only God knew what the people of North Finchal did with all the books they borrowed. The queue sometimes stretched so far that some people had to stand outside waiting just to borrow books. This was a big contrast to the library she had worked in before. In the consulate, they had to bribe people to make them read fiction. They were only keen on reading textbooks in order to raise their status economically. No one bothered with fiction, but in North Finchal, the number of fiction readers was so staggering that Ada decided to emulate them. She too started to read the works of many contemporary novelists, and that helped her a great deal culturally. In her new job, she had to be very fast in filling books, in filling tickets, in making out readers' tickets, in tracing lost ones, and all the time she was forever saying, thank you, when she accepted the return books, thank you when she gave the tickets back, thank you when she handed over new books. In fact, working at the North Finchal Library was more of a thank you job than anything else. All in all, Ada was happy. She got a first class job. She was happy that her colleagues at work liked her. She was happy that she was enjoying her work. It was all right for her, being a first class citizen for the part of the day when she worked in a clean, contrarily heated library. But when about but what about her children? Who was going to look after them? Since it was nearing the end of the summer term, Francis did agree to look after them temporarily, while it was still news that she had got herself employed in a library, doing a first class citizen job. Frances was prepared to look after their children, but soon her job was no longer news. Everybody accepted it with a sniff. Who is going to look after our children for you? Francis asked one day when he was tucking the babies into their city bed. I can't go on doing it. You will have to look for someone. I can't go on looking after your children for you. Ada spun around, aghast. She was not really surprised that Francis said this. She had known it was coming, but what she hadn't realized was the resentment over the children which was accumulating in Francis. She would she could sense the surprised anger. She could sense the suppressed anger when he referred to them as her children, not theirs. In Nigeria, when children were good, they were the fathers. They took after him, but when they were bad, they were the mothers taking after her and her only mother and her old mother. Ada was frightened. She could feel her neighbors speaking through Francis. Their landlord and landlady were in their late 30s. They had been married for 10 years or more, but the wife had no children. They had resented Francis' idea of bringing his children to England in the first place. They had warned him that it was going to be difficult for them, but left him alone when he told them that Ada had already paid for their fare. They consoled themselves with the fact that after all, the children would not stay with their parents at Ashtown Street. They would have to be fostered. Most Nigerians with Nigerian Most Nigerians with children send their children away to foster parents. No sane couple would dream of keeping no sane couple would dream of keeping their children with them. So rampant was the idea of foster parents that African housewives in England came to regard the foster parent mother as the mother of their children. They said that in England, Nigerian children have two sets of mothers, the natal mother and the social mother. As soon as the Nigerian housewife in England realized that she was expecting a child, instead of shopping for Pam and kitten little Popsy, she would advise for a foster mother. No one cared whether a woman was suitable or not. No one wanted to know whether the house was clean or not. All they wanted to be sure of was that the foster mother was white. The concept of whiteness could cover a multitude of sins. This was all right for the Nigerian wife who, for the first time, was tasting the real freedom of being a wife. She was free from the hindering influences of her kids and kin. She was free to work and earn money. Any type of work would do: cleaning, packing goods in a factory, being a bus conductor, all sorts of things. The money she thus earned went partly to the foster mother, and the rest was blown on colorful outfits from some big department store. Most Nigerians' wives would say that they had to send their children away because they lacked suitable accommodation for them, and there was a great deal of truth in this. But what they would not admit was that most of them were brought up in situations far, far different from the ones in which they found themselves in England. At home in Nigeria, all a mother had to do for a baby was watch and feed him, and if he was fidgeting, strap him on her back and carry on with her work while that baby has slept. But in England, she had to wash piles and piles of napkin while wheel the child around the sunshine during the day, attend to his feeds and regularly as if one were serving a master, talk to the child even if he was only a day old. Oh yes, in England, looking after babies was in itself a full-time job. This was difficult for a Nigerian wife to cope with, especially when she realized that she could no longer count the help the extended family usually gave in such situations. So most Nigerian children born to so-called students were condemned to be fostered away. Everyone expected Ada to do the same. It came as a big surprise, therefore, when they realized that she was not making any attempt to look for a foster mother, and now Francis told her that he was not going to look after her children for her anymore. Things were difficult for Francis too. He had never in all his life been allowed to make his own mistakes because he had never made his own decisions. He had always consulted his mother, his father, and his brothers. In England, he had to make do with his Nigerian neighbor. Ada guessed that they were laughed at him behind her back when she was at work, so she took a deep breath before replying. You mean you decided, you thought it all out, and then you tell me what I'm going to do? Everybody laughed at us in this place. No African child lives with his parents. It is not convenient. It is not possible. There is no accommodation for it. Moreover, they won't learn good English. They are much, much better off with an English woman. But you forget, Francis, that when we were young, we spoke Yoruba flawlessly. Even though we are Igbos, we picked the language up at school and at play. That shouldn't be difficult. At English, yours and mine is not all that bad. Ada explained in her gentlest voice, aware of the time that she was not only arguing with Francis, but with all the other tenants in Ashdown Street. He considered this for a while and then replied, but they have no friends to play with. But they would have when they start at the nursery. I am sure they will. Ada was hoping for the impossible. It will be easier for a loaded camel to go through the eye of the sewing needle than for a child with two parents to get the nursery place. The waiting list was a mile long. Then the landlord started his intimidation. The children must leave the house. He even took it upon himself to advertise for a foster mother for them. Luckily, no one offered to take two black children, boy and girl, aged 9 months and 2 years respectively. The landlady sensed that Ada did not like it and left her alone. But the men persisted. Another couple with Ojos, who had left their 4 children behind, advised her to send hers back to Nigeria. Everybody talked and speculated. The trouble was that was like a peacock who kept wanting to win all the time. Only first-class citizens lived with their children, not the blacks. They were right in a way. The housing conditions were so bad that for days she couldn't see Francis at all. As soon as she arrived home from work, he would disappear for fresh air. The children had no amusement, and their parents would not let them out for fear that would break their necks or the steep stairs. They were hushed and bullied into silence so that the landlord and his wife should not be disturbed. When it rained, which was often the nappies were dried in the same room. The second-hand heater they used always smoked. The Obis lived not a human being at all, but like animal. The Igbos lived not like a human being at all, but like an animal. To cap it all, after the day's work, Ada did not have sufficient space to sleep in. Francis was getting very fat, and their single bed was not big enough for them, let alone the peanuts Ada. So, usually, when she was not needed by her husband, she would squeeze in on the city with her babies. At about this time, she met and became friendly with a Cockney girl called Janet. Janet was Mr. Baba Lola's wife. Her story was not only remarkable but startling as well. Mr. Babalawa had come to England just like Francis and Ada to study, but unlike Ada and Francis, he had been single and had a Northern Nigeria scholarship. This means that he had more money to spend because the Northerners, unlike the overeducated Southerners, would do anything to encourage the men to really get educated so that they would come home and obtain the jobs in the North, which were then going to be Southerners. Mr. Babalola was therefore a very rich student. Rumor had it that he had a glozily flat and was always entertaining. This was no surprise to anyone who knew the Northerners. They liked to spend their money to really enjoy what they had, and to them, what they had was theirs only today, not tomorrow, nor the day after. Allah would take care of the future. That was certainly Babalawo's philosophy of life. For some reason, however, the money for Mr. Babalawo stopped coming. No one knew why. One thing was sure. He was not doing any studying, though he had come originally to real journalism. Word went round that he was getting poor. He could not maintain his old level of entertainment. So these friends of the happier days took to their heels. They stopped coming, and Babalawo moved to much more modest Ashlow Street in Keshney Town. It was at this time when his funds were running low, and he was desperately trying to convince his government that given another opportunity he would do well, that he met Janet. He was waiting impatiently at a telephone kiosk to make a call to one of his now elusive friends. He waited for what seemed ages, but the young woman already in the kiosk seemed to clutch at the receiver for hours. Many mothers came, got tired of waiting and left, grumbling. But Babalawo waited. He was going to make his call, even if it took him all day. It started to drizzle, and he was getting soaked to the skin. So he banged on the kiosk door and shook his fist at the girl to frighten her. Then he looked closer and saw that the girl was not phoning anybody. She was asleep, standing up. Babalawo's first reaction was fear. Was she dead? He wondered. Then he banged Banda, and the girl woke. He was so sorry for her that he took her home. Janet was pregnant. The father of her baby was a nameless West Indian. Her stepfather would not take her in unless she promised to give the child away. Her mother had died a year before, leaving her stepfather seven young children to look after. Janet was the oldest, so she had been turned out of the house. She would not go to any social worker. All he would do would be to convince her that at the age of 16, she was too young to keep her baby, but Janet wanted her baby. This story awakened the communal African spirit in Babalawo. It never occurred to him that he was doing anything illegal. Taking a 16-year-old girl. On the contrary, Babalawo started to entertain his few remaining friends with Janet. It never occurred to him that he might fall in love with her, that he might want to protect her, to make her his wife. At that time, Janet was being offered to any black man who wanted to know how a white woman looked undressed. Most of Ada's neighbors had had their sexual adventures with Janet, but soon all that changed. So this is where we're going to be ending today's book reading section. Thank you so much for listening. Till we meet again in the next session. Thank you and bye bye.